At Starbound, we like to tell stories the human way, not with artificial slop or AI voices. What's HFY without humanity? So, subscribe if you want to keep it that way. My name is Dan, and let's begin. The first plasma bolt turned the market stall into a geyser of splintered wood and vaporized fruit. Contact! Marek Holt's voice was a flat bark over the squad comm. He was already moving, dropping behind the low stone wall of a cistern as secondary blasts tore through the morning of Cursor Square. Dust and the acrid tang of superheated stone filled his lungs. Moments before, he had watched a small crashed child chase a carved wooden tussock across the cobblestones. Now, the world had torn open. "Source!" Captain Darien demanded, his tone clipped and steady. "West Quadrant, elevated positions, multiple shooters." Marek risked a glance over the wall. Black-clad figures swarmed from the alleys, their rifles spitting incandescent green. The Vaughn, the Bone Eaters. Their attack was the brutal slaughter the rumors described. A civilian creche, his slate-grey hide etched with the fine lines of age like a river stone, went taut. He collapsed with a smoking crater in his chest, a shriek dying in his throat. The child Marek watched vanished in the chaos. "Tarn, Ran, suppress the rooftops," Darien commanded. "Holt, with me. We find hard cover and we establish a perimeter." The two Kresh soldiers in their squad, Tarn and Ran, laid down timed, alternating bursts of covering fire. Their plasma rifles hissed, sending pulsing shots towards the insurgents on the rooftops. Marek broke from the cistern, his boots pounding on ancient stones as he sprinted for the Elders' Hall archway. Darien, his prosthetic silver arm a flash of reflected light, was a step ahead of him. They slammed into the archway's relative safety, pressing their backs against the thick stone. Debris rained down around them. "Comms?" Darien asked as he scanned the square. Marek tapped the side of his helmet. "Static. Full spectrum jamming. They've blacked out the valley." "Predictable," Darien grunted. He peered around the arch's edge. "They outnumber us at least 10-1. The village militia has already broken." The Vaughn cut down the few armed Kresh villagers who mounted a defense. The attackers charged into rifle fire, ignoring their losses. This was a slaughter. They had lost the village. He risked another look, his rifle tight in his grip. He scanned past a burning cart, a shattered fountain, and a collapsed wall of adobe bricks. And there, behind the wall, small and motionless, was the child. Nim, the settlement's elder's son. He was frozen, staring at the scene unfolding before him. A Vaughn warrior stood over a fallen villager, a ritual knife in his hand. The whispers were true. "Halt!" Darien's shout cut through the noise. "We are pulling back, east, toward the river. Extraction is at grid 048. The objective is survival." The order was logical, correct. Staying here meant dying for a village already taken. Every instinct honed by his training screamed it at him. But he kept his gaze locked on the child. Advancing insurgents cut Nim off, trapping him between them and the square's open kill zone. He would die, or they would take him. "Sergeant, do you copy? We are moving." Darien's tone hardened. The Vaughn dragged the villager's body away, his eyes cold and hungry. A small, faded tattoo on Marek's neck, the imprint of a child's hand, prickled, a reminder of a promise made across light years. "Marek!" Darien's tone was sharp enough to cut steel. Marek turned his head, meeting his captain's gaze. He stayed silent. He slapped his free hand against the emergency transponder on his belt. The diagnostic light flickered from green to amber, then went dark as the transponder entered a low-power, intermittent ghost mode. He gave a quick, sharp gesture, the Concord standard for setting charge. Then he broke cover. He ran west, away from safety. He ran deeper into the firefight. "Halt!" The thunder of another explosion swallowed Darien's roar. The world narrowed to the space between one piece of cover and the next. Marek's lungs ached for air as he pumped his legs, his rifle rising to meet targets. An insurgent popped up from behind a pile of rubble, and Marek fired a single plasma bolt through his chest, his momentum carrying him forward. The Vaughn dropped, his black robes smoking. He vaulted a low wall, landing in a crouch in the dust. The air was thick with the dying screams and the Vaughn's guttural war cries. He was alone. His squad had left, following orders, following logic. He operated on a promise that bound him. He reached the collapsed adobe wall and slid in behind it, his back pressing against the rough bricks. Nim was there, curled into a ball, his small body shuddering. He stared at the ground. Two Vaughn rounded the corner of a nearby building, their weapons low. They moved past his position, their attention fixed on the cowering child, their scarred faces splitting into predatory grins. Marek brought his rifle up and fired from the hip. The first shot caught an insurgent in the throat. He staggered back, clutching the cauterized wound, and fell. The second warrior dove for cover and returned fire. Green plasma bolts sizzled past Marek's head, chipping stone from the wall. Marek ducked, ejected the spent power cell from his rifle, and slammed a fresh one home. The click echoed in the lull between shots. He waited a beat. 2. He rolled out from behind the wall, low to the ground. The Vaughn expected him to pop up. He came out low instead. He had a clear shot of the warrior's exposed leg. He fired twice. The bolts struck the insurgent's thigh, melting through the armor and flesh. The Vaughn screamed and collapsed, his weapon clattering on the stones. Marek was on his feet in a second, closing the distance. The wounded Vaughn fumbled for a sidearm. Marek kicked the pistol from his grasp and drove the butt of his rifle into the fanatic's face with a heavy crunch. He gasped in the sudden silence. The immediate threat had passed, but the battle still raged around them. He turned to the child. Nim stared at him, terror and awe on his face. Deliberately, Marek knelt. He unsealed his helmet and pulled it off, letting it hang from his belt by its mag clamp. He wanted the kid to see a human face. Sweat and grime covered his features, but he was just a man. "It's okay," he said, his voice low and calm. He spoke in Terran Standard, relying on his calm tone to bridge the language gap. "You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here." He held out a hand, palm up, an offering, a promise. The distant fighting filled the seconds that stretched between them. Then, with a shuddering breath, the small crashed child reached out his 3-fingered hand and placed it in Marek's. It was small, cold, and trembling. The light transport bucked as it ascended, its engines whining against the strain of a combat takeoff. Captain Darien stood at the open ramp, gripping a support rail. Below, the village of Karis was a ruin of fire and smoke. "He is still moving," Tarn reported, his tone strained as he traced a path on the topographical holomap projected from his wrist. "Signature is heading deeper into the west quadrant." "We lost him," Darien said, his voice flat. "I'm declaring Sergeant Holt lost in action. Cause of loss, failure to comply with a direct order in a combat zone." Ran, the other Kresh soldier, nodded. "It is the logical conclusion, Captain. Human sentimentality is a known tactical liability." Darien remained silent, staring down at the chaos. He replayed Marek's last moments. The sprint into enemy fire was irrational, suicidal. But the hand signal, setting charge, a gesture ingrained from training, the action of a soldier with a plan, a mind clear enough to follow procedure even while running into the fight's core. An act of raw emotion, preceded by a gesture of cold logic. The two acts warred in his mind. He had saved his remaining 2 soldiers. The mission parameters were clear. Preserve the unit. A single soldier, a single human, counted as an acceptable loss against the squad's survival. The calculation was correct. The transport banked hard, leaving Cursus behind. Darien turned from the ramp, the wind whipping at his features. He composed the report in his mind. Delivering it to command would be a formality. Another casualty in a long war. But the image of Marek's final look stayed with him. It was the look of a man who had calculated a different kind of risk, weighed a different kind of cost. That, and the contradictory signal, unsettled him. The apothecary shop's back wall collapsed inward, showering them in dust and plaster. Marek shielded Nim with his body, his armor taking the brunt of the falling debris. A Vaughn patrol was sweeping the street, their guttural shouts getting closer. The patrol pinned them down. "This way," Marek grunted, pulling Nim through the ruined shop. They scrambled over overturned shelves and shattered glass vials that released puffs of fragrant, decorative powders into the air. He found a storeroom in the back, a dead end. The patrol's voices were just outside. Marek raised his rifle and scanned for an exit, finding only solid walls. He had trapped them. He had traded his life and the child's for a few extra minutes. Defeat settled on him until a frantic tug on his arm startled him. It was Nim. The boy's expression was urgent, overriding his fear. He pointed at the floor, at a heavy iron grate set into the stone. He babbled a stream of clicks and whistles, repeating one word over and over. It sounded like shaka, water, flow. Marek understood. He holstered his rifle and jammed the blade of his combat knife into the grate's seam. He put all his weight on it, his muscles straining. The metal groaned. The voices outside were right at the door. With a final heave, the grate popped free. A wave of foul, damp air washed over them. Below was a black void. The storeroom door splintered as a heavy boot kicked it. "Go!" Marek said, lifting Nim and lowering him into the blackness. The child went readily. Marek heard him land with a soft splash in shallow water a few feet below. A black-clad figure filled the doorway, rifle raised. Marek dove headfirst into the hole, grabbing the edge of the heavy iron cover and pulling it over the opening as he fell. It slammed into place with a deafening clang of iron on stone. And the world went black an instant before plasma fire tore through the space he'd just occupied. He landed in ankle-deep, foul-smelling water, Nim clinging to his leg. Above, he could hear the scrape of boots on the iron above, followed by muffled shouts. He reached down and lifted the small, trembling child into his arms. They were alone, together, in the dark. The subtunnels were an ancient, crumbling labyrinth. Marek's helmet providing a grainy, low-light view of dripping ceilings and slick, moss-covered walls. The air was thick with the stench of decay and stagnant water. Nim was a silent weight on his back, his small arms wrapped tightly around Marek's neck. An exhausted stillness replaced his earlier terror. After hours of wading through the foul water, Marek found a dry maintenance alcove. He slid Nim off his back and set him down. The child immediately curled up against the wall, his knees drawn to his chest. Marek sat down beside him. A deep ache settled in his bones. He unclipped a field ration from his belt, his last one. He broke it in two, the nutrient brick snapping with a dull crack. He held out one half to Nim. The boy stared at the offering, his large eyes luminous in the faint green glow from Marek's helmet display. He hesitated for a long moment, then took the bar with his small, three-fingered hand. He nibbled at first, then ate with a hunger that had him finishing the bar in seconds. They needed a plan. They could only stay in the tunnels for so long. Marek took out his knife and began scratching a crude map of curses in the thick dust on the alcove floor. He marked the town square, the river, the rough direction toward the Concord lines. It was a guess at best. Nim, watching him, crawled over. He looked at the map, tilting his head. Then he reached out a small finger and pointed to a specific junction of lines Marek had drawn. He traced a new line, away from the village, leading toward a cluster of V-shapes Marek had sketched to represent the distant mountains. The boy knew a way out. They emerged from a grated culvert into a shallow ravine several kilometers outside the village. The air was crisp and cold, a welcome shock after the sewer's stale confines. It smelled of dust and dry mountain herbs. Cursus was a column of black smoke against the pale sky behind them. Marek scanned the landscape with his binoculars. The dust-fanged peaks were still a day's march away. Between them and the mountains lay a wide, open plain of scrub grass and rock outcroppings that Vaughan patrols crisscrossed. The Vaughan were hunting them. Nim shivered as the wind cut through his thin tunic. Marek stripped off his outer uniform jacket, a heavy, armored fabric, and wrapped it around the boy's small shoulders. It hung on him like a tent, the sleeves dangling past his feet. Nim looked up at him, his head just visible inside the jacket's high collar. He reached out and tugged on the fabric of Marek's undershirt, a small, proprietary gesture. Marek gave a tired, faint smile. "Yeah, kid, we're in this together." He hoisted Nim onto his back and picked his way through the ravine, keeping low, using the terrain for cover. A deep chasm, a scar carved into the planet's surface, blocked their path. It was hundreds of feet deep, the bottom lost in shadow. A single, rickety rope bridge spanned the gap, swaying in the wind. At the far end, a Vaughan patrol stood silhouetted against the setting sun. They had set up a checkpoint. "Ah, damn it," Marek muttered, lowering Nim to the ground behind a cluster of rust-colored boulders. Crossing the bridge was suicide. Going around the chasm would take days, a delay that would ensure their capture. They had no rations left, and water was scarce. He scanned the chasm's edge with his binoculars. He caught a glint of metal about a kilometer down, an old mining zip line, a thick, corroded cable stretching across the abyss with abandoned machinery. It was a massive risk. The mechanism would shriek, exposing them. But it was their one path forward. They waited for dusk, for the sky to bleed into shades of purple and orange, letting the shadows deepen. Marek fashioned a crude harness from a strap of webbing, securing Nim tightly to his chest. "Hold on," he whispered, clipping the harness onto the zip line's rusted pulley. "And look at me." He took a deep breath and pushed off. The pulley protested with a scream of metal on metal that echoed through the chasm. It was far louder than he'd anticipated. Halfway across, shouts erupted from the bridge. The patrol spotted them. Green plasma bolts hissed past them. Marek twisted his body, shielding Nim with his own armored back. A searing pain erupted in his left shoulder as a bolt hit him squarely. The impact felt like a piston slamming into him, the heat cooking the muscle and flash boiling the tissue beneath his armor plate. He clenched his jaw, black spots blooming in his vision, and gripped the harness. With a final, jarring lurch, the pulley slammed into the anchor station on the other side. Marek fumbled with the clip, his left arm useless. He unhooked them, and they collapsed onto a rocky ledge. He rolled onto his good side, putting himself between Nim and the bridge, and pulled his sidearm. He fired a few suppressive shots back toward the patrol. The firing stopped. Wounded, but across. They found shelter in a shallow cave that wind and time had carved. An agonizing throb in Marek's shoulder clouded his thoughts. He managed to shrug off his gear and peel back the layers of his uniform. Bile rose in his throat at the sight of the wound. The blast had blackened and warped his armor plate. Beneath it, his skin was a ruin of charred flesh and weeping blisters. A deep energy burn, the kind that cooked from the inside out. He pulled out his medkit, his fingers clumsy. He sprayed the area with a dermal regenerator and slapped on a patch of biofoam, hissing through his teeth as the cold spray hit the raw wound. It was a field dressing. He needed proper medical attention to save his arm. Nim watched him, his face tight with concern. As Marek struggled to apply a pressure bandage with one hand, the boy got up and went deeper into the cave. A haze of pain enveloped Marek. A moment later, Nim returned. He carried a handful of thick, mossy lichen, its color a deep, vibrant green. He held it out to Marek, making a soft, clicking sound and gesturing toward the bandage. Marek hesitated. Basic field medicine dictated using only sterilized Concord supplies on open wounds. But he remembered a line from a pre-deployment briefing on Kyanos. Certain native lichens possess properties both antiseptic and analgesic. Kresh healers had used it for centuries. He looked at Nim's insistent face and the trust there. He took the lichen. It was cool and damp. He packed it around the patch's edge before securing the bandage. The effect was almost immediate. A soothing coolness seeped into his skin, dulling the pain's sharp edges. The relief was so profound, tears welled in his eyes. He looked at Nim and managed a weak, grateful smile. The boy gestured to Marek's chest. "Marek?" he said, his voice small and raspy. He then jabbed a finger at his own chest. "Nim." He gestured back at Marek, his expression expectant. "Marek," the soldier repeated, his own voice hoarse. "My name is Marek." Captain Darien stood at parade rest in the command tent of Forward Operating Base Kilo. Cool air filled the tent, carrying the sharp scent of stressed electronics, bitter Kresh stimulant brew, and the flat odor of atmospheric scrubbers. "So you are reporting Sergeant Holt is killed in action," stated Brigadier Zelen, a Kresh officer whose face was a map of old campaigns, rigid with hardened dermal plates. "Yes, sir," Darien said. He disobeyed a direct order to retreat and enemy forces overwhelmed him. An emotional response to a civilian casualty prompted his actions. Zelen made a note on his wrist-mounted command unit. Human sentimentality is their greatest strength and their most predictable flaw. "I accept your report, Captain. You made the correct tactical decision." He dismissed Darien with a curt nod. Darien exited the tent. The debrief was over. As he walked towards his squad's temporary quarters, 2 guards escorted a Kresh refugee, a female, toward the command tent. A long-range patrol had picked her up miles south of the blacked-out valley. Dust covered her, and she moved stiffly. He overheard her speaking to a guard in frantic clicks. She was from Cursus. She asked about the elder's son, Nim. He was missing, she said. The name struck Darien. The elder of Cursus was a crucial Concord ally, a rare local leader who had advocated for cooperation. His death was a blow, but the survival of his son, that would be a potent symbol of hope and defiance. A massive morale boost for the local population, whose support was critical in the war effort. Later, Darien passed the makeshift refugee area. The same Kresh female was on her knees, her body shaking with silent sobs as others tried to comfort her. The name was whispered among them. Nim, the boy is gone. Darien stopped walking. He now understood. The missing child, the human who ran back, the tactical value of a symbol. A different logic asserted itself, one he was only now beginning to comprehend. Holt had seen more than a child. He had seen a high-value strategic asset. Back in his quarters, he pulled up the tactical logs from the retreat. Static. He ran a deep-range scan along Holt's last known trajectory, filtering for Concord emergency frequencies. For a minute, only static filled the monitor. Then, a ghost of a signal appeared. A single, intermittent data packet, repeating every 10 minutes. Corrupted, weak, but there. Sergeant Holt's transponder. He had a search grid. A cold prickle on the back of his neck made him freeze, his hand tightening on Nim's shoulder. They were traversing a narrow, rocky outcrop, the wind whistling around them. He scanned the terrain, rocks and shadows. He trusted the feeling. "Down," he whispered, pulling Nim with him into a deep, narrow crevice between 2 towering slabs of rock. He pressed them flat against the cold stone, holding his breath. A minute later, 2 figures appeared on the ridge above them. They moved in unnerving silence, their black robes blending them into the shadows. Jasker's elite trackers. They paused, tilting their heads as they sniffed the air. A Vaughn's sense of smell was far more acute than a human's. His pulse pounded in his ears. The scent of his own sweat, his wound, and the lichen's alien odor filled his nostrils. Surely they could too. Nim, pressed against his chest, let out a tiny whimper. Marek cupped a firm hand over the boy's mouth. A tracker's head snapped in their direction. He seemed to pierce the shadows, to stare right at them. The tracker had them. With his free hand, Marek felt the rock face above him. He found a loose, flat stone the size of his palm. He pushed it. The stone dislodged and went skittering down the ridge's far side, clattering against other rocks before coming to a rest. The sound drew the tracker's attention. They both turned, scanning the slope where the rock had fallen. After a long moment, one of them made a dismissive gesture. A rockfall. An animal. They turned and continued on their way, disappearing into the landscape as silently as they had appeared. Marek held his breath until they vanished, then exhaled in a shuddering wave. He slumped against the rock, his body trembling with adrenaline. Night fell, and the mountains grew cold. They found a small overhang that offered some protection from the biting wind. Marek activated a smokeless heat pack, and they huddled around its meager warmth. Nim, exhausted, soon fell asleep, his head resting against Marek's thigh. In the mountains, stark quiet, memories came. Marek pulled a simple metal locket from under his shirt. He thumbed it open. A tiny hologram flickered to life, projecting a three-dimensional image of a laughing boy with a shock of red hair and a missing front tooth. His son, Sam. He traced the boy's smiling face with his finger, the ghostly image cool against his skin. He remembered the last time he'd seen him, on the orbital station's sterile launch pad. Sam, all of 5 years old, had clung to his leg. "You have to promise, Daddy." "Promise what, champ?" "Promise you'll come home safe." Marek had knelt down, his chest tight. He had looked his son in the eye. "I promise, Sammy. I will always come home to you." The memory's clarity was a fresh pain. He looked down at the sleeping crashed child beside him. Leaving Nim in that village would have broken his vow. How could he face his own son, knowing he had left another to die? Saving this child was part of keeping that vow. He had to return as the man his son believed him to be, someone who protects others. He closed the locket, the image of his son vanishing. His path was clear. He would get Nim to safety. Captain Darien stood before Tarn and Ran in the cramped confines of their transport's gear bay. "I have filed a flight plan for our reconnaissance patrol along the Dustfang Peak's base," he said, in a tone that precluded debate. Tarn and Rand exchanged a look. "Captain," Rand began, his voice hesitant, "with respect, this is illogical. We are risking 3 trained soldiers and Concord property for one human who willfully disobeyed a direct order. His chances of survival are slim." "Your assessment is correct," Darien conceded, as he fixed his gaze on his subordinates. "Standard doctrine dictates we cut our losses. However, new intelligence has come to light." He paused, letting them process his words. "We have identified the asset Holt attempted to secure as a high-value political symbol. We must prevent the strategic loss of local support in the wake of this asset's perceived abandonment. Therefore, we must make a new calculation. The potential strategic gain of recovering the asset now outweighs the risk to this unit. This has become about shoring up our entire position on this planet." Darien concluded, his voice a low, tense rumble. "We will recover that asset." Tarn and Rand looked at each other again. The captain's logic, however novel, was sound. They both gave a sharp, affirmative nod. "Gear up," Darien ordered. "We leave in 5. They moved to their tasks, loading extra power cells and medical supplies, spoofing the transport's transponder and filing a false flight plan. They were now a ghost ship, a rogue unit, on an unsanctioned mission. The last of the field ration was gone. Marek had given the final piece to Nim, watching as the boy ate it. A dull ache in his stomach was a constant reminder of his hunger. It sharpened his senses, but sapped his strength. His wounded shoulder throbbed in time with his pulse, a miserable rhythm. Exhaustion pressed down on him, begging him to stop, to lie down, to sleep. But Nim kept him moving. The boy seemed to draw strength from the harsh landscape that was killing Marek. He led them to a patch of thick-rooted plants growing in the lee of a rock outcropping. He used a sharp stone to dig them up, broke one open, and offered it to Marek. The root was fibrous and bitter, but it was food, energy. The kid knew this land. As they chewed on the bitter roots, Marek saw it. A flash of light from a distant ridge, high in the peaks. He froze. It flashed again. Short, short, short. Long, long, long. Short, short, short. SOS. A standard Concord distress code. A jolt of energy cleared his head. Hope. It could be a rescue team, another lost unit. Caution followed, cold and sharp. It could also be a trap. The Vaughn were fanatics, but they were cunning. Still, it was their only hope. He looked at Nim, who was watching his face. Marek pointed toward the flashing light. "Friends," he said. "Maybe." He got to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. They started the painful climb toward the ridge. A standard-issue Concord emergency transponder, propped on a rock, served as the beacon. It blinked its message into the twilight, but the area was quiet. Every instinct screamed trap. He was turning to pull Nim back when they emerged from the rocks around them. Jasker himself stood 20 feet away, his frame immense, draped in articulated bones of slain beasts. His elite hunters flanked him, their plasma rifles leveled. The hunters surrounded them. Jasker smiled. "The soft-hearted alien." His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "Your spirit is strong. I can feel it. It sings a song of defiance." He stepped forward. "I will give you a warrior's death and consume your spirit with the honor it is due. It'll make me stronger." He gestured toward Nim with a massive 3-fingered hand. "Give me the child. He is kindling. You are the fire. It is you I have come for." Marek pushed Nim behind him. Wounded, exhausted, and vastly outnumbered, he raised his rifle. The power cell indicator was blinking red. 3 shots left. He met the warlord's gaze and gave his answer with the steady aim of his rifle. Marek fired. 1, 2, 3. The plasma bolts were for suppression. He targeted the rocks near Jasker's hunters, forcing them to duck for cover. It bought him precious seconds. He used them. He grabbed Nim and scrambled backward into a narrow canyon pass, a dead end in the rock wall. The Vaughn were already moving, closing in. He fumbled at his belt for his last piece of equipment, a single demolition charge. He slapped it onto the canyon wall, set the timer for 5 seconds, and dove for the ground, pulling Nim under him. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, and the resulting rockfall collapsed the entrance to the pass, blocking their pursuers and trapping them. Jasker's furious roar echoed from the rockfall's other side. They started digging. Marek rolled onto his back and gasped for breath. He looked at Nim. The boy's eyes were wide, his terror held in a silent, profound stillness. He just watched Marek, his expression one of complete trust. Marek checked his sidearm. 1 bullet left. Its purpose was clear. In the Concord military, it was the final option. A mercy for yourself, or for someone you protected from capture. The thought of what the Vaughn would do to Nim made him sick. He raised the pistol, his hand trembling. Could he do it? Nim saw the weapon. He met the sight with calm. He reached out and placed his small, 3-fingered hand over Marek's. The touch was soft. Merrick looked from the child's unwavering gaze to the gun in his grip. Sam's face flashed in his mind, a promise whispered across the stars. With a choked sob, he dropped the pistol. He pulled his combat knife from its sheath. He got into a crouch, knife held ready, shielding Nim with his body as the scraping sounds from the rockfall grew louder. From the transport's cockpit, Darian watched the heat and motion schematic. "I have his biosignature, Captain," the pilot said. "Faint. We have to lock on his transponder's ghost signal." "And the hostiles?" Darian asked. "A dozen of them, clustered at the canyon entrance. They're digging." Darian saw it on his own repeater screen. A dozen bright heat signatures and one flickering, fading one, trapped behind a wall of rock. He keyed the comm. "Tarn, Ran, prepare to deploy. Weapons free on my mark. Pilot, take us over the ridge, low and fast." From Merrick's perspective, the scraping stopped. The sudden quiet was heavy. He braced himself, knife held tight. Then a new sound broke the quiet, a sound he had longed to hear for days, the high-pitched whine of a Concorde transport's engines. The ship appeared over the canyon ridge like a predator from the sky, its belly-mounted cannons spitting plasma. Streams of fire tore through the surprised Vaughn ranks. The hunters vaporized where they stood. Jasker roared as the transport snatched his prize from his grasp, firing his own rifle at the transport's armored hull, the shots splashing harmlessly against the plating. The vessel's side door slid open. It hovered 20 feet from their position. Captain Darian stood in the opening, his expression a study in control. He extended a hand. Merrick pushed Nim up into the waiting arms of Tarn. He tried to follow, but his strength failed him. He collapsed, and the two Kresh soldiers grabbed his armor and hauled him inside. The door slid shut, and the ship surged upward, leaving the chaos behind. Merrick lay on the deck floor, his vision swimming. The squad was staring at him. He expected their judgment, a disobedient, wounded soldier who had thrown his life away on an emotional whim. But they were looking past him. He followed their gaze. Nim stood there, a tiny figure wrapped in an oversized human jacket, clutching a toy carved from a small piece of wood. The boy looked at the imposing Kresh soldiers, then turned and ran to Merrick's side. He clung to the human's leg, burying his face in the warm fabric of Merrick's trousers. This was the reason. This was the child the soldier had saved. Captain Darian stared, processing the scene. He had come back for a high-value symbol, a strategic asset, only to find a terrified child fiercely protecting a wounded man. He knelt, his prosthetic knee clicking on the deck plate. His hand settled on Nim's shoulder. The boy flinched, but held his ground. Then Darian looked at Merrick, his expression holding a new, profound respect that transcended rank and species. A medic worked on Merrick's shoulder, the hiss of a dermal regenerator a soothing sound. Nim sat beside him on the med bunk, staying close, his small hand resting on Merrick's arm. He clutched the carved toy in his other. Captain Darian sat on the bench across from them, his posture rigid. He remained silent since they pulled Merrick aboard, just watching them with a steady gaze. As the transport began its final approach to the base, Darian leaned forward slightly and gave Merrick a slow, deliberate nod. Merrick nodded back. Exhaustion washed over him. The pain in his shoulder was a dull, manageable ache now. He closed his eyes and rested his hand on Nim's head. The child leaned into his touch. As he drifted into a deep, healing sleep, he dreamed of home. He dreamed of a laughing boy with red hair. The war was far from over, but today he kept his promise. The human soldier and the alien child, a small, defiant bond formed in fire, were safe, flying toward friendly lines.